Hey everybody! Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Remarkable Spirit, Memories of a Medium. My name is Gabrielle Gardner, and I am a medium. This means that I see, feel, and hear the souls of those who are no longer residing in a physical body. They are in the non-physical, or in more traditional terms, they have died. Dying as I have come to know it most definitely is not the end. It is simply the turning of a page after completing a chapter. Today I will be sharing another remarkable story of spirit with you. And again, I will be reading directly from my journal where I make entries about all of the souls that I work with. And from this point on, I will be referring to the woman that I'm going to talk to you about today as Hannah. So for the sake of privacy, I have changed her name to Hannah. This gentle woman and the time that I spent with her has had a lasting, deep impact on me and who I am and the way that I work with spirit. In August of 2020, I worked a case to help find a missing woman. And in a sense, this is the case that broke me, temporarily of course. But as I put the pieces back together in the months following, I realized that a new version of me had been created, and I had become in that time a woman inspired to live a life dedicated to helping all those who are needing assistance in this life. That sounds like a big challenge, but that is what I mean. I feel that a purpose has been created in my time with Hannah, which is to reduce suffering in any way that I can, and to assist souls in the non-physical in moving to the place after this place. So, now I'm going to tell you about Hannah. This is a tough case for me to talk about, and I'm feeling it already, so I will be honest in this. As I introduce you to Hannah, hopefully you will be inspired by her story as well, because she wishes to be remembered not by the way that she passed, but by the love she left here in her time on earth. So this first entry is about the first time that I connected to Hannah. And again, I wasn't able to write about this for almost 6 months, so it will all be past tense. My experience with Hannah began late one muggy summer night when I was sent an article about a local missing woman. Looking back, I remember that the second my phone chimed with the text notification, I felt my energy do something unfamiliar as my guides began the process of forming a connection before I had even opened the message. From the very beginning, my body was having strong reactions to this case, and perhaps on some level, there was a visceral sense of knowing that what was coming would rattle me to my core. As I read the words on my screen that were describing a local silver alert, I remember an overwhelming feeling of nausea rising as my heart rate also increased. Hannah had late-stage dementia, but was still physically healthy and able-bodied. Her family stated that she had wandered out of their home 2 days prior when they had forgotten to lock the front door, and she hadn't been seen since. It went on to say that Hannah was often confused about her whereabouts, was mostly nonverbal, but usually recognized and responded to her name. It also said that this was the first time that she had wandered out of the house alone. Again, from the very beginning, I had a sense of deep urgency and fear about her well-being. And because at the time that I had learned about her case, Hannah had already been missing for 2 days. And at that time that I connected, I knew she was still alive, but I knew that she was in danger. As I intentionally tuned into her energy that night, I felt her fear and feelings of being lost and confused, but I knew she was still alone. Tuning into the energy of a living person is not something that I do regularly. I've only done it 3 times up to this point, and every time it has been orchestrated by guides in a very specific way, in which I don't actually have a lot of control over those experiences. And all 3 times, the person that they've had me tune into prior to their passing, they have died while I was connected to them. And so now, with those kinds of odds, I do get a sinking feeling in my stomach, but I just have to trust that even when they don't end with being able to prevent a death, it's making a difference in the bigger scheme of a soul's experience. I don't know if that's faith or blind optimism, but whatever it is at this point, I don't think anything would stop me from doing it. It seemed, so I'll go back to the journal entry, and it seemed impossible that an elderly woman would simply be lost and wandering the streets of a highly populated city without anyone noticing her. But as I went out just before 11 p.m. that night to begin searching, it quickly became clear that that was exactly what was happening. She was just lost somewhere in the city. And I began psychically tracking her whereabouts throughout the neighborhood where she had been last been seen. And I started at her home. And again, I have only been able to do this once, so I don't claim to be able to do this. This was some sort of, whatever it was a guided experience. But I was able to track her path, and I found that if I could get out of the car and walk in her footsteps where she had actually walked, that I would be able to see moments and views that she had seen through her eyes. It was a very strange feeling, and not something that it's just not something that I think I can do. There was something going on here with the guides, that they were allowing me to have this ability, but it was only with Hannah. So I found that intensely focusing on seeing what someone else had seen pulled me too far out of my body. And I think that that's partially what led to my body becoming very sick after this time with Hannah. But that was the only thing I knew to do at the time, and so I just went with it. I was walking down the sidewalk a few blocks from her home just before midnight with my mom driving beside me in the car. My mom worked this entire case with me all the way up until the moment that Hannah died. Or the moment that she transitioned. So I often need family by me when working these harder cases because it helps me to stay grounded and then provide invaluable insight and support when I'm up in my spirity land. But my mom was incredibly helpful in this case. So I was walking down the sidewalk and I suddenly got a flash image of looking up at the backside of a dumpster with an orange light above it. And I knew that I was seeing something that Hannah had seen near where I was at the time. And so I looked around and I saw a small field with a school up a block, and I went to it. And sure enough, I moved around a wall and I saw that scene. So I saw the back of the dumpster and the light. And I was shocked by that because I had believed it was real, but then when I saw that, I knew that I was really tuning into something that somebody else had seen. And so I went to stand under the light, and I saw that behind the dumpsters there was cardboard on the ground, and it looked like someone had bedded down there. And I still believe that that's where Hannah spent her first night. And also that's why the imprint was stronger, because she'd spent more time there, and that's what I saw. I stood up and looked around and saw a small opening in the fence around the front side of the school that was heading out in the opposite direction I had come, and knew that was the way she had left the schoolyard after her night of sleeping there. My mom had driven around the block and was waiting for me by the gate. And as I walked towards her, I remember having a strange feeling that I was supposed to turn around and look back towards the dumpsters. This isn't even the emotional part. When I did, I saw the orange light above the dumpsters begin to flicker. And it wasn't just once or twice, but it was a very significant, almost rhythmic pattern of blinking. And I knew I was on the right path, and something was pushing me to keep going. So I said out loud, okay, I get it now. I get this is a real. And as soon as I said that, the light stopped blinking. And I now believe, I know this is strange, but what made the light flicker was Hannah's higher self, or her soul self, the part of her that was untouched by the human ways of life or her dementia. It felt very different than the energy of a guide, and I truly believe this was Hannah reaching out to her guides, and she was able to communicate using the light flickers. This was the first in a series of signs that I think was sent by Hannah throughout the process of tracking her whereabouts. At that point, it was around 12:30 a.m., and I was completely drained, but it felt like we had a good place to start in the morning, so we went home for the night. We continued searching the next day, and I was able to continue tracking her path using the same strategy. Sometimes I was able to touch things that she had touched, like a gatepost, and I felt her energy. Throughout the entire day, it was clear that she had been confused and sometimes afraid, but still felt physically well. At another point later in the afternoon, I could see blinking orange lights on top of road closed signs leading down a few blocks of construction, and I knew that she had followed that path of lights. As I moved along her path, it became clear that she definitely had wandered in a strange path with no real direction, sometimes moving towards landmarks that were familiar to her, like a fast food sign, sometimes following a bright light, and sometimes moving away from loud sounds and people. Hannah had wove through a neighborhood, moved out to a main road, walked past a store, through a farmer's market area, through a park, and up to another school, where I again was able to get a view through her eyes, and again saw the backside of a dumpster. I remember looking around and being so excited when I saw them, because in that moment I had so intensely hoped that she would still be there. But unfortunately, she had already moved on. I knew we had made massive gains in catching up to her, and we were now only hours behind her instead of days. Again, we found cardboard on the ground behind the second set of dumpsters, along with some fast food wrappers, and I think that someone had given her some cheeseburgers for dinner. It was around 11 p.m., and we had tracked her to the back corner of a church parking lot. I had tracked her to that spot by following the light of a very bright illuminated cross high above the church that could be seen from blocks away. She had followed that light too. It felt like we were so close to her standing there in the light in that church parking lot, and we began to yell her name. We felt so close to her that we believed she would be able to hear us, but we didn't get a response. And to this day, I still believe that she was within a block of us in that moment, but she may have been confused or too afraid to respond to strangers calling her name. I remember feeling a bone-deep exhaustion unlike anything that I'd ever felt after the full day of tracking her and connecting to her. It felt like we were so close, but I wasn't getting a clear direction from the church, and it was like she had just stopped right there. Again, I believe that she had, at many times in her path, followed the bright lights which had brought her to that place. My mom convinced me to reluctantly go home for the night, and at that point I still felt hopeful we would find her. So this is the final day that I was connected to Hannah. That next day I woke up, and again, looking back, I believe that my body was having a reaction to the energy that I was the energy that I was picking up on from the moment I got out of bed. I now know that something was urging me to disconnect slightly so that it wouldn't be as intense when that bond was broken. But I was so invested and focused that I just couldn't see that at the time. And all I knew was that my gut was telling me it was urgent that we try to find her. And so we did that. I also remember that as soon as I woke up that morning, it had felt like a final countdown had started of the time that we had left to find her safe. That day was spent much like the day before, tracking Hannah's strange wandering path. But by 8 p.m., it felt like we were only behind her by an hour. And I remember having so much hope that we would make it to her in time. Suddenly at around 9 p.m. So suddenly at around 9 p.m. something changed. Unfortunately, Hannah had wandered into a more dangerous neighborhood. And we became much more worried about her safety. I tracked her up to a hill at the edge of a bike path that overlooked the freeway and knew that she had stood there less than 30 minutes before watching the beginning of the sunset. But as I felt her standing there, I felt someone watching her from behind, and that person had a predatory energy. And I remember the moment I felt their gaze lock onto her, and I knew that it was very wrong. Hannah had clearly looked very vulnerable and out of place walking alone in this dangerous neighborhood. And unfortunately, this person had seen her then and had begun to follow her. I remember being filled with panic and my hands started to shake as I felt what their intentions were. And so I moved down the bike path and had walked down not more than 20 minutes where she had walked down not more than 20 minutes before. And as I was walking, I got the impression that someone else had begun to track her on that same path too. But they had very different intentions than us. They had what I can only describe as a sick mind, and they saw an opportunity to hurt someone. And at that moment, I looked down and saw a missing poster with Hannah's picture on it down on the ground. And this was just such a clear spirit sign. A gust of wind blew the missing poster across my path. And it was just so undeniable that I was supposed to see it. And as it moved across my path, I was just filled with dread. And so I ran back to the car, and we slowly drove 3 blocks as I was feeling her energy. And we passed a street that teed back into the bike path that I had just been on, and that street ended in a cul-de-sac, dead-ended in a cul-de-sac. And as we drove past the street, everything in me started screaming that we had gone too far. And the sun had set. And I remember it seemed too dark as we drove down the road, and I could feel that she was so close. We drove to the end of the street and turned around at the end, and we sat there for a minute looking up the street for any signs of movement because I could feel she was like right by us. And I tuned into Hannah, and I felt that her fear had shifted to terror. And I got a sharp pain in my stomach and felt dizzy and like I was drunk. Everything I looked at around me was spinning and looked blurry, and I began to shake again. As we were looking up the street, the taillights of a parked car halfway up the block began to blink in that same rhythmic pattern, just like the lights above the dumpster. And we both knew that it was Hannah, reaching out. And then suddenly I had a stabbing pain in my chest that moved up to my upper abdomen, and then I was crying uncontrollably. And just like that, the connection was gone. And it felt like something had been physically ripped out of me. And I'd never experienced anything like that. And I haven't since. Truly felt like something was ripped out of my body in that moment. And that was the moment that Hannah was murdered. And she was so close. Literally like seconds away. And I just couldn't understand how we had been so close and still missed her. It didn't feel like it was supposed to end that way. This isn't a true crime documentary, so I'm not gonna share any details about her murder. I don't see it necessary in sharing that kind of violence, the details of that. I don't think our world needs any more of that energy. But so, I remember that silent drive home, and I just felt numb. I felt like there was truly an empty, hollow space where this connection to Hannah had been, and that moment that she was murdered, it was ripped out. And it was like, in addition to my brain not being able to comprehend it, my body couldn't. And I couldn't understand what had just happened. We were so close, it felt like we should have been able to get to her, and it still feels like we should have got to her in time, but we didn't. And I don't know why. But if there's anything that I have learned in my work with spirit, it's that we won't always know why. And most of the time we don't know why. Violence of that kind will ever make sense. But guides have shown that I was meant to connect to her in that way, in that time, because her mind was, the dementia was blocking her clarity to connect to guides. And so by using my human vessel, they were able to come in at a frequency where they could be with her so that she didn't experience what her vessel experienced. She didn't experience that violence. And by having that connection to the guide, she immediately crossed into light. And there was no hesitation. Immediately, the moment Hannah's life here on earth ended, she moved to the next place. There was no time in the in-between space. And Hannah's soul would have always been okay, whether anyone was connected or not. But I think that this all happened in this way so that there was no chance of her staying in the in-between space. And this way, she didn't experience what her vessel experienced. My vessel experienced something significant that night too. Being connected to Hannah at the time of her murder, it really feels like it broke something in me. And I now believe that I was so sick afterwards because of how long we had been connected over those 2.5 days. And having our energies mix so intensely at the time of her passing, because I was reaching so far to try to get to her in time, it left my body in a vulnerable state. And there's a hugely important connection between our mind and our body and our soul, and the energies that we encounter and absorb, they all affect our physical body. After that night, I was bedridden for 2 weeks, and I had a medically unexplainable case of acute pancreatitis, but I know that it was because I was connected to Hannah at the time that she was murdered. A big part of navigating spirit work is trial and error and learning what works and what doesn't work, and clearly this was something that didn't work, but I'm grateful that I had this experience. Meeting Hannah and knowing Hannah in the way that I got to know her, she felt like a friend, and that is a gift. So why am I telling you yet another story that doesn't have a happy ending? I wasn't able to talk about Hannah for 6 months, and I still can't talk about it much, but now that I can, I want you all to know Hannah, and I want you to know her story. My guides allowed me to briefly connect to her on the 1-year anniversary of her passing, and they showed me her in a beautiful place, surrounded by her loved ones. And I got to hear her, and she said that she would like her story to be shared because it has the potential of making a difference in others' lives. So don't remember Hannah by the way her life ended. Remember her as a woman that was so much more than that. She was a loving mother and grandmother and great-grandmother, and she loved to garden, and she loved to listen to the birds in the early morning, and she was sweet and gentle and kind. Let her story motivate you to protect others. That's what she wants. So don't ever wait for somebody else to call for help. If you see somebody who needs help, help them. It's that simple. When one of us needs help, we should collectively do whatever we can to make sure that person gets home safely. And I know without question that the world is full of beautiful people who will do just that. So let Hannah's story inspire you to help others get home safely. Do your part in making sure that people's lives are better, right? Make sure that you can help other people have better lives in whatever way you can do that. That doesn't mean that you need to be a hero. Just do what you can to make a positive impact on somebody's life. Add joy, not pain. And together I think that we can do better. And My guides have shown me that Hannah now exists in the place after this place with no more confusion. She is full of and surrounded by love, and she is with her loved ones in a place of just incredible happiness and peace. So hopefully you can find ways to remember and know Hannah in that way too. As always, I am humbled and I am honored to be able to do this work. And I'm eternally grateful to the guides and the angels and the source from which we all come. Spirit is amazing. My name is Gabrielle Gardner, and this has been another episode of Remarkable Spirit. Thank you for joining us, and I hope that you see us again next time and see more about how Remarkable Spirit is all around us.